March 11, 1826, France, Paris, Palace of Versailles. A man who was not as tall as a traditional Westerner stood in front of the window, his brows were furrowed, as if he was thinking about something. That person is the owner of this palace and the entire French Empire, André Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon II, the nephew of the great Napoleon the Great. A week ago, the French Empire officially declared war on the British Empire, and the French Navy began to fight the British Navy within the time frame. At this time, the British Navy was undoubtedly the most powerful in the world, and it was beyond the imagination of other countries in the world at that time to start a war with the powerful British Navy, except of course, France. Since André came to the throne in 1814, he first defeated the 7th Anti-French coalition with thunder, and defeated Austria, Prussia, and Russia in the next 2 years, so that he had to recognize the strong position of France, and allowing the above-mentioned 3 countries to cede land and pay compensation caused the 2 countries to lose a large area of territory, and Russia was forced to give up its occupation of Poland. More importantly, they received a large amount of war reparations from these 3 countries, which enabled the recovery of France's economy that was about to collapse, and played a great role in promoting the development of France's national strength during the next 10 years of recuperation. At the same time, because Austria, Russia, and Russia have been severely weakened, the pressure on the east of France has been greatly reduced, and it can concentrate on dealing with the pressure from the west. André is also very nervous now, the nails of both hands are almost pinched into the flesh due to the forceful grip. He is not sure of winning this war against Britain. After all, Britain's powerful navy lies there. For hundreds of years, it has beaten the navies of European countries into a very embarrassing situation. However, after 10 years of development, the strength of the French navy has also risen rapidly. Although the number of warships cannot be compared with the old naval power of the United Kingdom, the quality of the warships has greatly surpassed that of the United Kingdom. The gap is not too big. For Britain, as long as the navy wins, the war is basically over. Although the French army is very powerful, without the of a powerful navy, it is absolutely impossible for them to cross the English Channel. As far as France is concerned, if the navy can win, then the powerful French army can easily land on the British Isles, and the weak British army is obviously not an opponent of the French army armed to the teeth. De Lacy believes that Britain can be completely torn into pieces. Therefore, for the victory of the naval battle, both sides devoted almost all their naval power without reservation. Suddenly, a staff officer ran in and interrupted André's thinking. The officer saluted him and said, "Your Majesty, news has just come from the front that our navy has won an unprecedented victory in ambushing the British Navy in the Bay of Biscay. Almost half of the British Navy's warships were sunk or captured by our army, and our army lost a lot of money. It is very small, and now the strength of our navy has greatly surpassed that of the British Navy. Admiral Boulter is preparing to launch an attack on the British Home Fleet in order to completely destroy the British Navy." After hearing the news, André's original nervousness was immediately swept away, and he ordered, "Immediately send an order to Marshal Davout, let him be on standby at any time, and immediately lead the expeditionary force to board the ship after the Navy's victory." Like the British march. The officer led the way out. At this moment, André seemed to see the scene where his army occupied Buckingham Palace and captured all the British royal family. Yet, Xiaoji jumped up happily holding the admission notice in his hand. "Damn it, I finally encountered something happy in the past 2 months." Xiaoji murmured. Later, when he was returning home, he had a car accident and almost became permanently disabled. Unexpectedly, the timing turned around now. The application for studying abroad that he had sent carelessly at the beginning would now receive a reply. This was something he never even dreamed of. As the saying goes, happiness depends on misfortune, and misfortune depends on blessing. The other party is from the School of Management of the University of Paris, and he is asked to report in a month. Paris is the place he has always longed for, to be precise, the place he and his ex-girlfriend have always been longing for. Paris is not only a place full of romance, but also famous for its countless places of interest and costumes. Although he was alone now, the attraction of Paris continued unabated. Xiaoji is also a lover of military history and weapons. In his room, there are always many biographies of famous generals in history and some models of weapons. But in his heart, apart from his former girlfriend, these things are what he loves the most. In the next few days, Xiaoji's family will undoubtedly be the busiest. Not only do they have to go through some procedures such as passports and visas, but they also have to deal with those relatives and friends who heard the news and came to congratulate them. Finally, everything was ready, except for buying the plane ticket. We waited for the departure time, and Xiaoji had time to relax. After getting together with some good friends, he stayed at home all the time, helping his parents with housework as much as he could, which made his parents praise his son for finally growing up and being sensible. This made Xiaoji very depressed, as if he had always been a child before. Anyway, he was already 22 years old this year. If this was in ancient times, he would probably have had several children. Looking at the slightly childish face in the mirror, Xiaoji couldn't help but smile wryly. It can also be said that Xiaoji grew up in a honeypot. His father is a senior manager of a large enterprise, and his mother is also a professor at a university. Coupled with the doting of his grandparents, he is also completely in love at home. The image of a little emperor. On August 20th, there is still a week before departure. Xiaoji received a call that day, which surprised him, because it was his ex-girlfriend Zhang Qin who called him, and asked him to meet at the park they used to frequent at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Originally, he didn't want to go, but he couldn't bear to refuse. After all, it was a 4-year relationship. How could he just forget it? Thinking that he was going to leave anyway, he didn't know if he could meet again in the future. It would be better to see her for the last time now, so after having dinner early, he still went. That park is not far from Li's house, and not far from Li's Zhangqin's house. It can be said to be in the middle of the two, so this park has become the best place for them to date. When Xiaoji arrived, Zhangqin hadn't arrived yet, so he walked around first. On the hills in the park, in the small lake, and under the long pavilion, they have left their figures everywhere in the past 4 years, but now the scenery is still the same, but Yiren is no longer there. In a corner of the park, an old man was wearing a pair of black glasses. There was a table in front of him, and a banner predicting the future of misfortune and fortune stood next to him. He looked like a typical image of a magic stick. Thinking about a year ago, Xiaoji and Zhangqin asked him for a fortune-telling. At that time, the dead old man repeatedly affirmed that the two of them would be happy and grow old together. Xiaoji was happy at that time and gave him $21, but what about today after 1 year? The two have broken up. Thinking of this, Xiaoji couldn't help laughing at how stupid he was at the time. That kind of fortune-teller, in order to make money, of course only said nice things. It's ridiculous that he still believed it. It seems that the IQ of people in love really dropped. On the spur of the moment, Xiaoji couldn't help but feel teased, which could be regarded as avenging himself for last year. Walking to the fortune-teller's table, Xiaoji said, "Fortune-teller, do the math for me." The fortune-teller raised his glasses with his hands, and said in his heart, "Hey, another fool has taken the bait." Then he said, "Sit down. Little brother, what are you doing? Let's count my recent luck." Xiaoji said after thinking for a while. "Oh, well then, I'll do the math for you." After the fortune-teller finished speaking, he pretended to do the math. After a while, he asked, "Little brother, have you traveled far recently? This old guy's guess is really accurate." Xiaoji said in his heart. But he replied, "No, I don't plan to travel far." The fortune-teller smiled and said in his heart, "You kid is still playing tricks on me. When I was eating in a restaurant 2 days ago, I heard you kid and a group of people say that you are going to France. It is also your luck. Back, I touched it. So he said, for fortune-telling, sincerity is important. If you deliberately don't tell the truth, then I have nothing to do. How about this, I still know where you are going. Shall I say it? After speaking, the old man pointed to the place where the sun set. Xiaoji said in his heart, how does this old boy know? It seems that he really has 2 brushes. So he nodded. The fortune teller saw Xiaoji nodded and said with a smile in his heart, hey, fight with me, you are still a little tender, Zhang is still old and spicy. Then he shook his head and said, it's not good, it's not good. After hearing the fortune teller say not good, Xiaoji's heart was raised, and he asked quickly, old man, what's wrong? Why is it not good? Seeing that Xiaoji has almost been hooked, the fortune teller burst into laughter. It seems that he has already been hooked. As long as I add more fire and scare him, I am afraid that he will not obediently take out the money. So he said sternly, oh, little brother, I think you are really unlucky recently. I also happened to hear that night, your seal is black now, and it is really bad if you go away now, maybe there will be disasters. How could Xiao Zhang have gone through such battles at such a young age? In addition, his grandparents were from the countryside, and those old people more or less had some feudal superstition ideas, so he was somewhat affected. Being so frightened by the fortune teller, I immediately got scared, and hurriedly asked, then what should I do? Seeing that Xiaoji was so frightened, the fortune teller couldn't say how happy he was, but he didn't seem to show it on his face, and said, this is very difficult, the best thing is not to go. How can I do that? I've prepared everything, and there are regulations over there. If I don't report when the time comes, I will be disqualified. Xiaoji panicked. The fortune teller saw that the heat was about the same, so he said, actually, it's not impossible, but this. Knowing what he meant, Xiaoji quickly took out 100 yuan from his wallet and handed it to the fortune teller. Seeing Xiaoji's generosity, the fortune teller was not to mention how happy he was, took the money, and then took out a triangular-shaped thing from his pocket, with some symbols on it, like ghostly drawn symbols, and handed it to Xiaoji. Then he said, it was given to me by my master back then, and it will keep you safe if I carry it with me, but I only have this piece. To meet you today is considered a predestined relationship between the two of us, so I will give it to you. Xiaoji felt very sorry when he heard that there was only one other person and gave it back to him, so he gave the fortune teller 200 yuan. The fortune teller sighed in his heart that he was lucky today, and unexpectedly met such a fool. I still have a big bag of such things here. Because he was afraid that Xiaoji would come back to trouble him, so after Xiaoji left, he hurriedly packed up his things and left. Anyway, he had earned enough money today. Xiaoji hadn't gone far when he suddenly saw a child in front of him fall down, so he ran over to help him up. But a tripod-shaped thing hanging on the child caught his attention. Hey, isn't this the same as the one that the fortune teller gave me just now? Immediately he knew that he had been fooled again. I ran back to look again, and the fortune teller old man didn't know where he went. Slapped himself, Xiaoji scolded himself for being a fool. Reading www.yuyuganshu.com wanted to throw away the fortune teller's gift, but he was a bit reluctant, since it cost 300 yuan anyway. After putting away the things, Xiaoji went to the place they agreed upon. From a distance, he saw a girl in long white clothes leaning quietly on the railing of a pavilion. The breeze is flying, like a lily swaying in the wind. Xiaoji could tell from the familiar back that it was Zhang Qin, his former girlfriend. Seeing that beautiful figure, Xiaoji couldn't help but feel heartache. Because that beautiful lily does not belong to me now. He didn't know the reason, and he didn't want to know. He knew that she had broken their vow. At the beginning, he was very disappointed, helpless, and desperate, but he was not a cowardly person. Since she chose someone else, it only showed that she did not belong to him, not the other half of his life. Xiao Ji walked over slowly. The girl might have sensed that someone was coming, so she turned around, and a beautiful face appeared in front of Xiao Ji's eyes. Xiao Ji felt that she was still so beautiful, but she was a bit more mature than before. "Are you here?" Zhang Qin said softly. Xiao Ji nodded, but didn't speak, just quietly looked at this person who once occupied an important position in his life. After a while, Xiao Ji asked, "What's your purpose here?" He didn't intend to spend too much time on this woman who had changed her mind. Yu Reading welcomes all book friends to come and read. The latest, fastest and hottest serial works are all in Yu Reading. Yu Reading welcomes all book lovers to come and read. The latest, fastest, and hottest serial works are all in Yu Reading. Mobile users please read here. Perhaps feeling Xiao Ji's impatience, Zhang Qin's face changed slightly, and then asked very far-fetchedly, "How are you recently?" "Fortunately, it's not too bad." Xiao Ji replied somewhat bluntly. "I heard that you are going to France, is that right?" Zhang Qin continued to ask. Xiao Ji just nodded, but did not answer. "Is there anything else? If not, I'll go back." Xiao Ji asked, and turned around to prepare to leave. After waiting for a while, there was no answer, so he walked out of the pavilion. Suddenly there was a crying voice from behind, "My father is sick, and the operation costs hundreds of thousands." Hearing this sentence, Xiao Ji's whole body was shocked. "So he left me for a reason," Xiao Ji said in his heart. But he didn't stop, because he knew that even if he knew the reason, he couldn't help much. They were over, she made the choice she thought was right, and he had nothing else to do except respect her choice done. This can only be blamed on good luck. Looking at Xiao Ji's leaving back, Zhang Qin burst into tears. But she also has no way to change, because after all, this is her own choice. After returning home, Xiao Ji seemed to have lost his soul. He doesn't hate Zhang Qin, he just hates why God is so cruel. He must separate two people who love each other so much, and it's the first time he feels sad about his incompetence. If he has money, then maybe all of this will not occur. At the same time, for the first time, he also had an unlimited desire for money and power. In the past, he has always been the kind of person who tends to be ordinary. For him, it is enough to have enough money, as long as he can live with the one he loves, that is enough. However, from that moment on, he completely changed. After spending the last few days in a daze, it was finally time to set off. The whole family went to the airport to see him off. Under the encouraging eyes of his father and the nagging voice of his mother, Xiao Ji bid farewell to the land where he had lived for 22 years, but an unknown world awaited him. In a place he didn't see, a girl was silently watching his leaving figure, and as he walked further and further away, tears had already flowed out. The stewardess on the plane was very beautiful and enthusiastic, but at this time Xiao Ji didn't care much about these things, and now the words "don't get close to strangers" were almost written on his face. If he had met so many beauties in the past, he would have taken the initiative to strike up a conversation. The time on the plane is very boring, so Xiao Ji had to put all his energy on the clouds outside the plane window. "I remember that when I was a child, I often imagined that I could have a pair of wings and be able to fly above these clouds, but when I grew up, I didn't have those clouds," naive thought. Listening to the music in the MP3, Xiao Ji fell asleep unknowingly. In his sleep, he seemed to have returned to his carefree boyhood. "At that time, I didn't have to think about anything, I just knew how to play all day long." After an unknown amount of time, Xiao Ji was awakened by a noise, and all the passengers were panicked. He didn't know what happened, but felt the plane was shaking constantly. He didn't know until he heard the radio that there was something wrong with the plane, the engine was on fire, and the plane they were on was about to crash. After hearing this news, Xiao Ji only felt dizzy in his head. He couldn't be so unlucky. How fragile human life seems at this time. All the people were tense and disturbed. Since the ocean was right below them, it was impossible for them to make a forced landing, except to wait for death. Almost everyone is praying, whether it is God or Buddha, as long as it is God, they all pray to him. But the miracle didn't happen, and the so-called gods didn't appear. A few minutes later, the plane came into close contact with the sea. Xiaoji only felt as if he had been hit hard with a hammer, his eyes went dark, and then he didn't know anything. The plane sank slowly, and the cold sea water crushed the thick shell of the plane with its strong pressure, and the sea water rushed in. At this time, everyone on the plane had already lost consciousness, and slowly died of suffocation without consciousness. However, there was an accident with one person, and that was Xiaoji. Right now, he was surrounded by a light blue halo, and all the sea water was blocked, so now there was only one living person left on the plane. What was unexpected was that the aperture was actually the tripod-shaped thing he thought he had been tricked into. If he was sober now, he would definitely not be able to help apologizing to that old magician. After all, what he was given to him was genuine. But with the influx of more and more sea water, the pressure on the aperture is also increasing, and it gradually changed from the previous round shape to an oval shape, and it seems to be showing signs of collapse. At this time, an old voice suddenly appeared on the cold seabed. "Hey, since you can get this amulet, then you are destined to be with my old man." Yu reading www.yuyugonshu.com. I just don't know which gave it to me. The treasures of the Genpai that I left in the faction were all sold, and it seems that my mission faction is really in decline. It turns out that the owner of the voice is the founder of the mission faction, and the magic stick is a disciple of mission. You kid is also unlucky, you actually fell into such a deep seabed, and this amulet is a thing from a long time ago, and I don't have much consciousness left on it, so I can't take you out of this ghost place. But I can't just leave you here, so I'm sorry, I have to take your soul away and leave your body here. Then I'll help you find a good family for reincarnation, and I'm doing you a favor. Then, a faint green smoke-like thing was stripped from Xiaoji's body, and slowly condensed into an image, exactly the same as Xiaoji's. This is Xiaoji's soul. After Xiaoji's soul glanced at his body with infinite nostalgia, the light circle took him away quickly through the water. Only his body was left in the cold and dark seabed. And that night, a piece of news was broadcast on China's news network. At 3 o'clock this afternoon, Flight B2621 from Shanghai to Paris crashed in the Mediterranean Sea, killing all 105 passengers and 9 crew members on board. After the news was broadcast, 3 women fainted at the same time, including Xiaoji's mother and grandma. The other one is Zhang Qin. At this moment, Xiaoji found himself in a dark place. Slowly, a faint light appeared in front of him, so he tried his best to run to that place, but he was horrified to find that he couldn't move at all. So a wave of fear hit my heart. Yu Reading welcomes all book lovers to come and read. The latest, fastest, and hottest serial works are all in Yu Reading. On November 9, 1790, it was raining lightly, and Joseph was rushing home. With his younger brother's new connection to Ballas, who would soon be a member of the 5-member tribunal that would replace the Public Safety Commission, he graduated from seminary as a minor quartermaster. Originally he was working, but someone told him that his wife Julie Clary was about to give birth, so he hurried home on leave. For the development of the storyline, it is a few years ahead of the real history, and everything has changed, so please do not compare it with the real history. The road conditions in Marseille are very bad, there are potholes everywhere, and the whole city looks a bit dilapidated, which is also a portrayal of the whole of France now. Years of wars have made the country more and more declining. Faced with the interference of many other countries in the French Revolution, France also seemed a little powerless. A luxurious carriage passed by Joseph's side, and the splashed water stained his new overcoat, but the people in the carriage drove away as if they didn't notice it. Joseph looked angrily at the passing carriage, but made no other moves. Because it can be seen that the owner of the carriage is definitely not something he, a small quartermaster, can afford to mess with. If he doesn't do it well, he may even lose his hard-won job. So he can only choose to swallow his anger, and he can only count himself as unlucky. But he swore secretly in his heart that in the future he would definitely ride in a more luxurious carriage than this, live in a house better than the best house in Marseilles, and trample these powerful people under his feet. Of course, the current him just took what he thought just now as words to vent his anger. What he didn't expect was that a few years later, what he said now would really come true. His family stood at the top of French power, and he himself became Prince of France. But what he wants now is to get home sooner and see his soon-to-born child sooner. The joy of becoming a father kept pounding him. After a while, he arrived home. At this time, a middle-aged woman was looking anxiously outside the gate of his house. That was his mother-in-law Désirée Clary. Seeing Joseph coming back, Désirée and number 8226, Clary rushed up to meet her and said, "Oh, God! Joseph, you are finally back. Don't you know that Julie is about to give birth?" "Oh, I'm sorry. I was as far home as possible. Is Julie okay now?" Joseph explained. "I don't know. Dr. John has been here for a while, but there is no movement yet." So the two could only wait anxiously outside. Suddenly, the sky changed color, and large swathes of dark clouds gathered over the city. The thick clouds seemed to be overwhelming. In a church, an old priest looked at the dark clouds in the sky and murmured, "The devil is coming, and the world will fall into endless killing and destruction." It's a pity that no one heard his words, otherwise if you say that, you will think that he has a sick head. Almost all the French people have fallen into the frenzy of the revolution, and the power of the church has also dropped to a terrible level. There are not many left, which has caused the dilapidation of many churches. There was a huge boom in the distance, and the whole city seemed to be shaken. All of a sudden, there was thunder and lightning, and it rained heavily, as if the end of the world had arrived. At this time, Julie also reached the most critical time. Dr. John and his nurse are tending to her. "Keep working harder, ma'am, you can do it. Come on. I believe you can do it." Dr. John encouraged Julie. It was the first time he had encountered such trouble after delivering so many children. At this time, Julie felt terribly painful, but she still concentrated all her strength on her lower body, because this was the effort she had to make as she was about to become a mother. Finally, when she felt that she was about to be unable to hold on anymore, she felt something detached from her lower body. Then she doesn't know anything. The cry of the baby resounded throughout Marseille. And the dark clouds all over the sky also disappeared without a trace at this time, and the sun began to spread its brilliance again, as if everything just now had never happened at all. The only change, though, is that the first child of the Bonaparte family is finally born. When the doctor told Joseph that his wife had given birth to him a son, he went crazy with joy, kissed his exhausted wife tenderly, and took his son from the nurse. But he didn't know how to take care of the child, so within 2 minutes his mother-in-law snatched the child from her hands. I don't know how long it took for Xiaoji to regain consciousness, but he was horrified to find a European with blue eyes and a hooked nose grinning at him, and a middle-aged woman who was also European. The person was his face. He was frightened and screamed desperately, but he found that he couldn't scream at all, except for the crying sound of a baby. Reading www.yuyuganshu.com. He wanted to wave his arms to drive the two people in front of him away, but he found that he had no strength at all. He looked at his hands. "Oh my God! This is me!" He looked at two white, tender, chubby little hands. "How did I become like this?" Xiaoji was confused by this unexpected blow. At this time, Julie, who was resting on the bed, asked, "My dear, is our child okay? Why does he keep crying?" Joseph ran over quickly, looked at his wife lovingly, and said softly, "Honey, don't worry, our baby is fine." Dr. John said that he has never seen such a good baby. It is normal for babies to cry, yes. You don't need to worry about anything now, just take a good rest, and leave the rest to me and mother." After hearing his words, Julie closed her eyes in peace. "Joseph, it's time for you to choose a name for the baby." "Desiree and number 8226, Clary reminded. "Joseph also just graduated from a seminary, and he has no culture." He was really stumped by such a difficult topic as choosing a name. After thinking about it for a while, he had no choice but to use a random name to deal with it. So the meaningless name Andresi became Xiaoji's name now. Now that Xiaoji has basically woken up from the confusion at the beginning, he also heard Joseph's conversation. In order to study in France, he specially studied French. He also knew his new name Andresi Joseph and number 8226, Bonaparte. UU Reading welcomes all book lovers to come and read. The latest, fastest, and hottest serial works are all in UU Reading. Oh wait, what do they call me? Andresi and number 8226, Joseph and number 8226, Bonaparte. The Bonaparte family? The whole French Bonaparte, well, it can't be that great family, right? By the way, the middle-aged woman just now, oh, no. Listening to their conversation, she should be my current grandmother. She calls my father Joseph, so his the name should be Joseph and number 8226, Bonaparte. Oh, my God. Xiaoji didn't dare to think about it anymore. He actually became a member of the Bonaparte family. His shock here was so strong that he had to stop and organize his thoughts. "Oh, what are you hearing this cute little guy is babbling about?" Desiree and number 8226, Clary said in amazement. The attention of Julie and Joseph was also attracted. But Xiaoji spoke Chinese when he was talking to himself, so they couldn't understand a word, and in the end they could only attribute it to the unconscious sounds made by the baby. If they knew that Xiaoji spoke Chinese, the whole family would probably go crazy because of it. Think about it, a newborn baby can speak, and it is still a foreign language, maybe it can be called a miracle. It turns out that people really have an afterlife. Xiaoji thought silently. Since I came to this world inexplicably, instead of complaining about myself, I might as well start a new life again, and let go of all the past events of my previous life. After making up his mind, Xiaoji began to observe the surrounding environment. The date on the calendar was November 9, 1790. In other words, it is still the period of the French Revolution and the rise of the Bonaparte family. But thinking of this, he was confused again. Because he clearly remembers that Joseph and Julie were married in 1794 in history, but now this period is 4 to 5 years earlier. Could it be that history has changed because of its own reasons? Then I hope that the history of the Bonaparte family will not change because of this, otherwise, I will be the sinner of the family. After thinking about it, Xiaoji found that his eyelids were getting heavier and heavier, and he slowly fell asleep. It's no wonder that a newborn baby has so much energy. Slowly, Xiaoji also adapted to the present life. Since he is still too young, he can't do anything, he can only sleep after eating. In his words, he has to work hard to grow his body now and lay a good foundation for the future. However, the most embarrassing time for him is when he is breastfeeding every day. When Julie brings her huge to his mouth, he always feels very shy. After 20 years of experience, he will always think about other aspects, but this kind of thinking will not last long, because hunger will make him forget other thoughts. In addition, he can only drink milk now, so he suffers every day between psychological maturity and extreme physical immaturity. Although the current Bonaparte family is not rich, or even relatively poor, because the Bonaparte family really has too many children, that is to say, Xiaoji has many uncles and aunts. But they are still very young, so they have to rely on Joseph and Napoleon to support them. And the salaries of the two of them are not much. After all, Joseph is just a small quartermaster now, and Napoleon is just a junior officer of the Raphael Artillery Regiment, and the annual salary is only 920 livres. It was difficult to feed such a large family. But what Napoleon didn't expect was that among his so many younger brothers and sisters, after he became the Emperor of France, they fought to the death for the right to inherit. Because of this situation, Xiaoji's family also lived in a very poor life. They didn't have any extra money to hire servants, and all the housework was done by his mother Julie, so Xiaoji was also very well behaved, and he wouldn't cry unless he was too hungry. This also made people in the family praise him for being sensible and love him very much. Xiaoji knew that everything would change in a short time. 3 years later, his uncle Napoleon would be promoted to major and, having won the Battle of Toulon, he would be promoted to brigadier general in an exceptional way. From then on, the glory of Napoleon began, and the rise of the Bonaparte family also began. Napoleon had no choice but to attack Italy, expedition to Egypt, and launch a coup d'état, thus becoming the first ruling, standing at the pinnacle of French power, and the glory of the Bonaparte family began from then on. As for Xiaoji, the eldest grandson of the Bonaparte family, his future is almost limitless. And Napoleon will not have heirs for a long time. Historically, Napoleon's son was born on March 20, 1811, so he can be regarded as the throne of the French Empire for a long time heir. Napoleon's first wife, Josephine, was infertile, but Napoleon still loved her very much, but they eventually divorced in 1809. Napoleon's favorite person is Josephine. Although she has an affair with many people, Napoleon still loves her like a demon. It is precisely because Napoleon loves her very much that she is more indulgent, which is why Napoleon finally divorced her. At this time, in Xiaoji's little mind, he was already planning how to calculate his dear uncle. Reading www.yuyuganshu.com, that is to give Josephine some warnings at the right time. I believe she will restrain herself for the title of queen and her unparalleled wealth. In that case, Napoleon would not divorce her, and would not marry Mary and number 8226, Louise, so Napoleon and number 8226, and number 8226, Joseph and number 8226, Charles would not have been born. Then the throne is very likely to be his. Time flies, and a year has passed in the blink of an eye. Xiaoji is also 1 year old, he is also very strong, and he can already walk by himself. Although he is not walking very steadily, he can also run around the house. This was almost unthinkable at the time, when very few children were able to walk on their own at such a young age. This also added a lot of joy to their family. He can also speak some simple sentences. Of course, he did this on purpose. Otherwise, a child who is only 1 year old can speak fluently, which is unbelievable. Tomorrow is November 9th, which means Xiaoji is 1 year old. What makes him happy is that tomorrow his grandmother, uncles and aunts who have never met will come from Nice. And Napoleon will come too. This made Xiaoji very excited. After all, he was a great man, to be exact, a great man who was about to become a great man. Reading welcomes all book friends to come and read. The latest, fastest and hottest serial works are all in Reading. Reading welcomes all book lovers to come and read. The latest, fastest, and hottest serial works are all in Reading. Mobile users, please read here. Thank you for your support for Xiaoyu. But there are too few tickets, please bosses hit me with tickets, hit me hard. On November 9th, Marseille ushered in the first snow of this year, and overnight, the whole city turned into a vast expanse of whiteness. There was also a thick layer of snow on the road. But because of this, the whole city looks peaceful and holy. Andressi, don't run outside, it's cold outside. A woman's voice broke the rare tranquility. The child she called Andressi had already run out of the Dean and came to the street. Since it is still relatively early, there are no people on the street. Wow, what a lot of snow! Andressi exclaimed, looking at the thick snow. Then I squatted on the ground and played with the snow. not at all like a 9-year-old child. While he was having fun, he didn't realize that a man was already standing behind him. Then he grabbed him by the collar and lifted him up, saying, "Andresi, how many times have I told you not to come out into the streets?" It turned out that the man was his father Joseph. For some reason, Xiaoji was always afraid of him, so he quickly said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I understand, it won't be like this next time." "Oh, my God. Andresi, do you think I should believe you? If I remember correctly, this is the 5th time you have said that this week. It seems that you are not going to teach you a lesson. I won't be obedient anymore." After speaking, he raised his hand and prepared to spank his ass. Seeing this posture, Xiaoji immediately burst into tears before Joseph's slap came down. Because this trick is still very effective, every time Joseph wants to teach him, he cries loudly. And as long as he cries, his mother Julie will definitely come to rescue him immediately. Sure enough, as soon as she heard his cry, Julie cried out and sighed, "Oh, God! What are you doing, Joseph? Are you using it on him, my little baby? He's only 1 year old, what do you know?" And immediately ran out and snatched Xiaoji from Joseph, and then walked into the house without looking back. Knowing that he was safe, Xiaoji took the opportunity to turn his head and stick out his tongue at Joseph. Only Joseph was left standing outside, gritted his teeth fiercely at Xiaoji, and said angrily, "Stinky boy, use this trick again." But he couldn't do anything about it. Just after breakfast, his grandfather Clary's family came. Because they live in the suburbs of Marseille, not very far away, they came earlier. As soon as they met, his grandpa Kurt and grandma Desiree hugged Xiaoji. "Oh, my dear, I haven't seen you grow up so much in 2 months." Desiree was surprised, and after speaking, she kissed his little face vigorously. Because Xiaoji grew up much faster than children of the same age. He was only 1 year old, but no matter how he looked at it, he looked like a person who was almost 2 years old. Yet, Kurt agreed, and took Xiaoji from Dexilei's hand, wanting to kiss Xiaoji's little face. But when Xiaoji realized what he was going to do, he immediately struggled hard. And said, "Grandpa! Beard! Piercing!" Kurt was taken aback. But then he burst into laughter immediately, and the rest of the people were also amused by Xiaoji's words. But Xiaoji was immediately embraced by his 2 aunts, Eugenie Desiree and Honor. Among them, Eugenie Desiree almost became Napoleon's wife. At 11 o'clock the Bonapartes finally arrived. There are his grandma Letizia and number 8226, Bonaparte and his numerous uncles and aunts, Maria and number 8226, Anna, Elisa, Lucien, Louis, Maria and number 8226, Annunziata, Caroline, Paulita, Polina, and Jerome. But Napoleon, whom Xiaoji wanted to see the most, has not arrived yet. I learned from his grandmother that since Napoleon set off directly from the barracks, although he had already set off 2 days in advance, at least he would not be able to arrive in Marseille until the afternoon. When it was getting dark in the afternoon, Napoleon finally arrived. And Xiaoji finally met the hero he had longed for. Napoleon was a little short, which is why many of his opponents called him short. But with a military uniform, he looks a bit heroic. Although he is only a 2nd lieutenant officer now, from his confident smile, Xiaoji can still see that he must be a great person in the future. So after setting his future plans, Xiaoji immediately fell in love with Napoleon, because he knew that Napoleon liked children very much. Sure enough, Napoleon was very happy to find that this nephew was very close to him, and gave Xiaoji a very beautiful little gift. Xiaoji knew from the adults' conversation that Napoleon was going back to Corsica this time. He also knew very clearly what Napoleon wanted to do. When Napoleon was young, he never recognized that he was French, because France had only purchased it from the Kingdom of Sardinia 10 years before his birth. So he decided to go back and free Corsica from French slavery. UU reading www.uugonshu.com. However, in the past 5 years, he returned to Corsica 4 times to prepare for the overthrow of the French regime and failed. So in the end, in order to be able to stand out, he chose to swear allegiance to France. The preparation for Xiaoji's birthday dinner is also very simple, because they are not rich now. But everyone is very happy. Especially his grandma Letizia and number 8226, Bonaparte. Although she doesn't like the Clary family, she is also very opposed to the marriage of Joseph and Julie, because she always thinks that their family is aristocratic. I like the Clary family who are just commoners. But now it's better, because Xiaoji's birth made her very happy, and she also accepted Julie. She was, after all, the first child of the 3rd generation of the Bonaparte family. But Napoleon hooked up with Eugenie Désirée by virtue of his brand new military uniform, and there was no result between them. The next day, Napoleon set off to leave. Although he liked this well-behaved nephew very much, it was nothing compared to the responsibility of rescuing the people of Corsica. Only Xiaoji knew that his trip was full of ups and downs, and he almost lost his 2nd lieutenant rank. However, this also provided him with a chance to rise after returning to Paris after the failure. Heroes have begun to step onto the stage of history, but Xiaoji, who knows history, can do nothing. I can only wait slowly, waiting for myself to grow up quickly. It is good to throw himself into this chaotic era, take over the baton of power from his predecessors, and establish immortal feats. UU Reading welcomes all book lovers to come and read. The latest, fastest, and hottest serial works are all in UU Reading. Ladies and gentlemen, let tickets and collections come more violently. Good morning, Uncle Paris, how is business today? Good morning, Mrs. Coote. Xiaoji greeted everyone he met. Good morning, Andressi. Where are you going to play today? The tailor shop owner, whom Xiaoji called Paris, asked with a smile. The weather is fine today, I'm going to play by the river. Xiaoji replied. In the blink of an eye, it has been 6 years since Xiaoji came to this world. History has not changed because of his arrival, everything still happened according to the previous track. In August 1793, the British fleet attacked France and captured the port of Toulon. Such a troubled world provides a lot of opportunities for a 24-year-old young officer named Napoleon Bonaparte, and his real military career is about to begin. On November 30, 1793, Major Napoleon, he was promoted again, was studying 13 batteries of artillery in the French port of Toulon on the Mediterranean. He was so tired that he could hardly rest for a moment. When he was transferred here on September 17 to assume the command of the 2 surviving artillery batteries, there were only 8 to 10 battered field guns, more than half of which were either out of ammunition or bored. Wrong. His long cloak and high riding boots were smeared with mud, and his damp uniform was crumpled, but he had performed a miracle in less than 2.5 months. Napoleon carefully surveyed the complex terrain of the Toulon area, and spent several weeks collecting various artillery from Avignon, Nice and Marseilles. Barras and Salicetti saw that the 24-year-old young gunner brought in junior artillery officers, ammunition, cannon, brand new cannon barrels, and 300 horses, mules, and oxen from all directions every day to carry those munitions to the fortifications. When I went up, I couldn't help showing a look of surprise and admiration. A few weeks later, in late November, the newly promoted major officer brought in more than 90 guns, including huge 24-pounders for use against British forts and ships. Toulon will be back in your hands before the end of this week, Napoleon said to the commander-in-chief. Due to the correct battle plan proposed by Napoleon, General Dugomir's Revolutionary Army finally recaptured Toulon at 9 a.m. on December 19. On December 22, 1793, he received an order for further promotion to Brigadier General. For the first time in Napoleon's military career, his name was widely spread in urban and rural areas, and Napoleon was only 25 years old at this time. Although in 1794, due to the rapid resignation of the Jacobin party, its main leaders Robespierre and others were also hanged, so in July, I just returned to Nice from the Communist Republic, and I still have nothing to say about this matter. The well-known Napoleon was immediately arrested, but at last, General de Mabiani ordered his release after careful consideration, but the new government did everything possible to provoke him, and dismissed him from all positions in the artillery corps. Transferred him to the infantry brigade as a humiliation to him. But at midnight on October 3, Napoleon's fortunes took a turn. Thousands of mostly working-class Parisians and royalists marched to the Tuileries that night, carrying banners. By dawn the next day, with tens of thousands of strong rebels in place, Ballas, one of the main leaders of the new government that overthrew the Jacobins, was anxiously awaiting reinforcements from the suburbs. In the early hours of the morning he summoned Napoleon and ordered him to mobilize artillery to defend the Tuileries. Obviously, time is very tight. Napoleon immediately dispatched Murat, a burly, 27-year-old cavalry officer with dark curly hair, to carry out Ballas's order. Murat almost magically brought 40 powerful cannons and ammunition from the suburbs. Napoleon deployed these troops carefully, and regular army barricades were built on the streets around the city. However, because the ancient streets were too congested, he placed most of the heavy artillery on the opposite side of the Tuileries Palace, forming a wide firepower network. The first attack by the rebels routed the troops at the Tuileries before they could deploy, but the regular regiments held their positions with guns, and by 2 o'clock in the afternoon the two sides were still deadlocked. By 3 o'clock, the rebels launched an even more vigorous attack, breaking through the defences and threatening the security of the National Assembly. The defending corps successfully repelled the advancing armed forces after regaining control of the situation. Napoleon, who was waiting, gave the order to fire, so dozens of cannons blasted the rebels to pieces, and it was impossible to deal with them only with muskets. The rebels were chaotic and defeated. It took hours to clear the 14,000 corpses in the streets. As Napoleon wrote to Joseph, "The enemy attacked us in the Tuileries. We destroyed many of them. They killed 30 of us, another 60 were injured, now everything is calm. As always, I didn't hurt a single hair. I'm so happy." 2 weeks later, Napoleon was promoted to Major General, and on October 25, Napoleon succeeded Barras as commander of the Internal Defense Forces. Napoleon's name spread throughout the former kingdom of what is now the First Republic. In 1795, Napoleon met a woman who fascinated her. Reading www.uuganshu.com. She was Josephine, who later became the Queen of the French Empire. Although Josephine had affairs with many people, Napoleon still madly in love with him. On March 6 of the following year, Napoleon and Josephine formally married in Paris despite the opposition of their relatives and friends. And Napoleon was also appointed as the commander-in-chief of the Italian front in the last week of last month. This was the dowry prepared by Ballas for Josephine, because he also had an affair with Josephine. Even for a long period of time, Napoleon, Barras, and Hoche took turns sharing Josephine's night. Even in France, 3 people sharing a mistress is a headache. Under Xiaoji's lobbying, Joseph rushed to Paris to attend their wedding, but in history, when Napoleon and Josephine got married, no one from the Bonaparte family was present. Because they all hated Josephine, especially Napoleon's mother Letizia and number 8226, Bonaparte hated Josephine to the extreme. From her point of view, Josephine is simply a whore, a slut, and a widow with 2 children. Such a person must never marry into the Bonaparte family. Joseph didn't plan to go at first, but Xiaoji told him that Napoleon today is not what it used to be, and he is just a small quartermaster now. If you go to Napoleon's wedding at this time, you will definitely get unexpected benefits, so Joseph was moved and took the whole family to Paris. This made Napoleon very happy, and it also enhanced the relationship between the 2 brothers so much that after his victory in Italy, he put Joseph in charge of the entire army's supplies, and Joseph took the opportunity to make a fortune. UU Reading welcomes all book lovers to come and read. The latest, fastest, and hottest serial works are all in UU Reading. Thank you for your support, everyone. Please vote and collect more. Xiao, thank you all. On April 2, 1796, Napoleon led 37,000 elite troops from Nice to the Piedmont Plain. Xiaoji's father Joseph also set out with the army as the general quartermaster of the army. But before leaving, he rented an apartment for Xiaoji and Julie in Paris and asked them to move to Paris. Tomorrow is the day to leave Marseille. After living in this city for 6 years, Xiaoji still has some feelings for this city. After all, it is the place where he was born, and it can be regarded as his new hometown in this world. He will be leaving tomorrow, and what Xiaoji is most reluctant to do is the 2 friends he met here, 9-year-old Dioka, the son of a blacksmith. 8-year-old Rodi, because his father is the owner of the most famous restaurant in Marseille, so he is very fat, looking like a ball from a distance. So Xiaoji always likes to call him Round Ball. Luo De was very dissatisfied with this, but under Xiaoji's oppression, he had no choice but to give up in the end. Although both of them are older than Xiaoji, but Xiaoji has nearly 200 years of knowledge ahead of them, and his actual mental age is also much older than Dioka and Luo De, so Xiaoji is slightly older than them. With a little trickery, the 2 of them were completely played around by him and became his loyal younger brothers. "Boss, I'm going to Paris tomorrow, and I don't know when I can see you again. I will miss you." Xiaoji said a little lonely. "Boss, I will miss you too. When I grow up, I will definitely go to Paris to find you," Dioka said with red eyes. The 2 small fists were clenched tightly, trying hard not to shed tears. Because he remembered that the boss once said, "A man never sheds tears lightly," he always believed that what the boss said must be correct, but he didn't know that there was another sentence in that sentence, "It's only because it doesn't reach the point of sadness." This shows how deep their friendship is. On the contrary, Rodi didn't seem so sad. Maybe he didn't know what sadness was since he was a child. I just said something like "I will miss Xiaoji" and then switched to other aspects. "Boss, I heard from my father that Paris is very big, isn't it?" Rodi asked naively. "Nonsense, Paris is the capital of France, of course it is very big, much bigger than Marseille." "Oh, then I must ask my father to take me there. I think the food in Paris must be much more delicious than Marseille." There was a drop of saliva that slipped down unknowingly. Alas, totally defeated by him. Why do you only think about eating all day long? Besides eating, can you think of anything else? If you eat too much, you will really grow into a ball. Xiaoji said angrily. But I don't know. My father said that now is the time to grow his body. He should eat more in order to grow as strong as him. Luo De replied innocently. After Xiaoji and Dioka got together, he broke out in a sweat. Is his father called Zhuang? The whole one super roller. If Rodi is a small ball, then his father is undoubtedly a big ball. But this is also the reason why their restaurant business is so good. The 2 father and son are simply live advertisements. When others look at the 2 of them, they will know that the dishes made by their restaurant must be very delicious and nutritious. How could someone be so fat in the age of okay, let's not talk about this. I will leave tomorrow. I don't know when I will come back. I will miss you. No matter what happens in the future, I will always regard you as my best brothers. Xiaoji said sincerely. Me too, you will always be my good brother, good boss. Dioka looked at Xiaoji and said. But boss, according to the standard you said before, we can't be regarded as the best brothers. Rodi asked stupidly. What standard? Why don't I know? Xiaoji looked at him inexplicably and asked. Boss, have you forgotten? You said you have to go to the window together, carry a gun together, go whoring together, and share the spoils together to be the best brother. That's right, boss. I remember you saying that too. Dioka said with certainty. After hearing what they said, Xiaoji almost fell down. I wondered in my heart, these two silly boys can't remember the usual business, but they remember these messy things clearly. Unexpectedly, I just mentioned such a sentence casually before, and these two boys still remember it. Alas, a lifetime of wisdom is ruined like this. In order to restore his glorious image, Xiaoji said, how could I forget? Of course I have my reasons for saying this. Think about it, we have already passed the first and fourth of the 4 standards. After doing it together, only the second and third are left. Hey, when did that happen? Why didn't I know? Dioka asked suspiciously. Idiot, why are you so stupid? Don't call him my brother in the future, I can't afford to lose that man. Roddy said contemptuously, but after seeing Dioka raised his fist, he still sensibly threw him at once. Mouth closed. Dioka, think about it, don't we have to go to church to pray together every week, and then listen to the pastor's lecture? This is considered a classmate. As for the spoils, I remember we went to Grandpa Peel's orchard last fall stealing the apples. It seems that you climbed up the tree to pick them, I picked them up below, and Roddy was watching the wind outside, and in the end we shared all the stolen apples. Do you think this counts as sharing the spoils? Said after finishing, Yu reading www.yuuganju.com. Xiaoji looked at him with a smile. Dioka thought for a moment, nodded and said, yes, it seems to be like this. Fight with me, you are too young. Xiaoji thought proudly. Aren't there still 2 standards? How do we meet them? Roddy continued to ask. Hey, as for carrying guns, I think so. 2 years later, I will go to Brienne Military Academy to study. I am your boss, so you can go wherever I go. Isn't this just carrying guns together? Dioka agreed to this, while Roddy said with a bitter face, Boss, can you not go? Look at my figure, is it expected to be a soldier? Why don't you go? Who told you to be so greedy? Dioka said sarcastically. You. Luo De had no choice but to look at Xiaoji with pleading eyes, meaning, Boss, I beg you, you can do anything you ask me to do, just don't let me be a soldier. My father said being a soldier is fatal. Our family has been passed down for 9 generations. If there is something wrong with me, our family will never be seen again. Going to the Brienne Military Academy was a decision Xiaoji had made long ago. Although it was not the best military academy in France, with the strength of the Bonaparte family 2 years later, he could not go there at all, but there is Napoleon where Lun studied. Going to study there will definitely greatly increase Napoleon's favor for him. For future development, the Brienne Military Academy is undoubtedly the best choice. Ignoring Luodi's pleading eyes, Xiaoji said, I'm very democratic, so let's decide by voting. In fact, the result is already obvious. Is there still a need to vote? Yu Reading welcomes all book lovers to come and read. The latest, fastest, and hottest serial works are all in Yu Reading. Ask for a ticket, collect it. After solving the problem of carrying a gun, Xiaoji continued, Look, we have reached 2 of the 4 standards, and the other one is about to be reached. As for the last one, we are still young. When we grow up, we must make it. Wouldn't it be over if you make up for it? So according to rounding, the 3 of us are the best brothers, so you have no doubts now. Both agreed, and the 3 hugged each other tightly. Suddenly, Dioka asked, Boss, what is prostitution? Why can't you do it now and wait until you grow up? Xiaoji was almost suffocated by this question, and he couldn't tell them the truth, otherwise he would spread pornographic knowledge and poison the flowers of the motherland. So he replied angrily, Whoring is a man wrestling with a woman naked on the bed. Oh, this is... Dioka nodded half understanding. Boss, but why does my dad wrestle with 2 women every time? Roddy asked in confusion. God, please help me. Xiaoji's head was growing big, and he was going crazy when they asked him. He deeply felt that it is absolutely necessary to give education to French teenagers after he takes power. It's not like the world 200 years later, where even naive and round kids know how to flirt. Seeing the eyes of the two seeking knowledge, he had no choice but to bite the bullet and explain, as long as a man and a woman wrestle on the bed, it is prostitution. By the way, how do you know? Do you have voyeurism? No, it's just that one night when I passed by my dad's door, I heard strange noises inside, so I quietly opened the door and saw my dad fighting with two ants I didn't know on the bed. I went to help my father, but found that they didn't seem to be really fighting, so I closed the door secretly and went back to the room. Oh, that's how it is. At first Xiaoji thought that the kid had that kind of habit. He didn't want his brother to be a pervert. But then he thought badly that Roddy's father was a super fat man, and he really didn't know how they fighted on the bed. They stayed together for a while, and then went home separately. The three of them made an appointment to see each other at the Brienne Military Academy 2 years later. Because France is still in the midst of internal and external troubles. The Royalists continued to launch rebellions, while other European countries continued to unite to intervene in the French Revolution. This makes France always under the threat of war, so there is a great demand for military talents, and the Brienne Military Academy is a juvenile military academy that specializes in cultivating talents for the army and senior military academies. And the requirements for the students are also very low, as long as they are physically qualified, they can go to study, and almost half of them can get special national scholarships, not only do not have to pay tuition fees, but also free of board and lodging, and even can earn money every month. Getting a little pocket money is undoubtedly the best way out for many children from poor families. Early the next morning, Xiaoji and his mother Julie got into the carriage that had been prepared earlier and embarked on a journey to Paris. Since none of their relatives were in Marseille and they left early, no one came to see them off. The horses pulling the cart ran slowly on the silent street, and the horseshoes stepped on the stone slabs, making a crisp sound. Sitting in the carriage, Xiaoji silently watched the house where he had lived for 6 years slowly disappear from his sight. The bits and pieces of the past 6 years came to mind again, the acquaintance with Dioka and Roddy. The three of them went to the river to play together, watched Dioka's father make all kinds of ironware together, went to Grandpa Peel's orchard to harvest fruits, and so on. Slowly, the carriage left the city. Due to the relatively good weather recently, the road is relatively flat, and it is not as bumpy as it is in rainy days. Suddenly, Xiaoji heard two voices, which seemed to be Dioka and Luodi calling him again. He ran to the back of the carriage and opened the curtain to see that it was the two of them chasing the carriage they were riding in. Didn't you tell them two silly boys not to come and see them off? How dare you not listen to the boss, and see how I deal with them next time we meet? Although Xiaoji said this, 2 tears still fell from his face. Xiaoji was afraid of parting, so he told the two of them not to come to see him off, but to his surprise, they still came. Gradually, the carriage got faster and faster, and Dioka and Roddy couldn't keep up, so they had to stop, calling their boss, and see you at the Brienne Military Academy in 2 years. Xiaoji returned to his seat and sat down until he could no longer see the two of them, without speaking for a long time. Since they were not in a hurry, the mother and son traveled all the way to the mountains and rivers, and it took a full month and a half to arrive in Paris. The apartment Joseph rented was not far from the Champs-Élysées, and only half an hour away from Napoleon's residence. Paris in 1796 was already a well-known metropolis in the world, although it was far from what it would be 200 years later. Due to the economic improvement, Xiaoji visited Paris almost all over the next 2 years. But most of the time he was still in the library, so there was a very interesting phenomenon in the Paris City Library. A little boy who looked less than 10 years old was holding thick chemistry, history, or military books. I watched with gusto. At first no one thought he could read the books, but the days passed and the boy was seen under the bookshelf almost every morning. So people gradually changed their views on Xiaoji. I think he must be a great big shot in the future. In fact, Xiaoji just took advantage of this time to sort out his thoughts, and merged the knowledge 200 years later with some knowledge he found in the library. And the capital of status and wealth. Xiaoji has a notebook, which is densely filled with things. Since he wrote in Chinese, and few people knew Chinese at that time, he was not afraid that others would find out that it was his plan for the future. What I believe above records the raw materials and production methods of the two powerful medicines of asterisk and asterisk asterisk asterisk, as well as Mauser rifles, assault rifles and submachine guns, mortars and field guns of various calibers, heavy guns and fortress guns. Various data. There are even design drawings of some warships. These are the weapons he prepared for his future army to defeat the enemy. He knows that in this war-torn era, only with an army that is loyal to him and invincible can he be unrestrained in this world and do what he wants. In the past 2 years, France has also undergone drastic changes. First of all, Napoleon achieved an absolute victory in the war against Italy, and the Austrian army was also beaten back by him. But in the expedition to Egypt at this time, he suffered a complete defeat, and even had to leave the army in 1799 and return to Paris secretly. At the same time, because of this opportunity, he gained the support of many big capitalists and big factory owners, and joined forces with CIs to successfully launch the Brumaire coup, disband the governorate government, establish a consul government, and become the first consul. And after taking power, he then ousted CIs, who was the second in power at the time. Since then, the Bonaparte family has finally stood at the top of French power. UU Reading welcomes all book friends to come and read. The latest, fastest and hottest serial works are all in UU Reading. UU Reading welcomes all book lovers to come and read. The latest, fastest, and hottest serial works are all in UU Reading. Mobile users please read here. Thank you for your support. Please vote and favorite. Thanks. On Christmas Day in 1798, Paris was very lively, because it was reported that Napoleon, the hero in the hearts of the people, was leading his expeditionary force in Egypt, and both the Egyptians and the Turks were defeated by him. Most of Egypt is now occupied by the French Legion, and even the capital, Cairo, is under the control of Napoleon's army. Almost all the people believed that their hero would bring them another great victory, and Egypt would soon become a French colony. The previous destruction of the Mediterranean fleet seemed insignificant in the face of this victory. But what they don't know is that their hero and his army are now at the end of their battles. Due to the failure of the navy, they were unable to get supplies, and the lost soldiers could not be replenished. Although they had conquered the whole of Egypt, in their current state, under the attack of the Egyptian rebel army Jezar and the Turkish army regardless of casualties, the French army the defense line is precarious and may be breached at any time. Due to the lack of medicines, a large number of soldiers who were injured could not receive good treatment, which greatly increased the attrition of troops. The plague from Cairo to Alexandria claimed the lives of 2,000 soldiers. Now Napoleon has less than 20,000 troops in his hands, and his opponent is several times his. In order to change this declining trend, Napoleon concentrated his troops and launched an expedition to Syria in January 1799. Unfortunately, due to the lack of food, the provisions of the French army were not enough for themselves, and there was not enough water, or even enough manpower to prisoners of war back to Egypt. At the same time, Turkey reinforced the front line with 35,000 people, which made the situation of the French army worse, and finally had to retreat to Egypt in May. The road to Damascus was also completely closed to Napoleon from this moment on. In the last August, Napoleon secretly left Egypt, and the little troops he left in Egypt finally chose to surrender. But it was also an important turning point in Napoleon's life. Back in Paris, what awaits him is a stage where it is easier for him to display his talents. Travel back to Christmas Eve 1798. Xiaoji's family prepared a very rich dinner tonight. Because of Napoleon's great victory in the war against Italy, the officers and soldiers who participated in this battle have received great benefits. It can be said that the whole of northern Italy is planned to be looted by them. A large number of gold, silver, jewelry, and cultural relics were brought back to France by them, with a total value of more than hundreds of millions of francs. As the commander of the legion, Napoleon got millions of francs, and Joseph, as the quartermaster of the legion, also got millions of francs by using his power. After the battle, Joseph left the army. Back in Paris, he bought a luxurious villa not far from Napoleon's residence on the Champs-Élysées, hired a few servants, and lived a life of nouveau riche. At that time, almost all the upper echelons of France regarded the Bonaparte family as upstarts in politics and the military. During Napoleon's expedition to Egypt, Joseph chose to stay in Paris as a businessman, so the failure of this expedition did not cause him any loss. On the contrary, during this period of time, he also made several big deals and made a lot of money. After dinner, Xiaoji did not go to the street to play like other children, but walked into Joseph's study. He plans to go to Brienne Military Academy next year. But before that, he had to get Joseph's support, otherwise he couldn't do anything. After entering, I found Joseph was flipping through the ledger. So Xiaoji said, "Dad, can I talk to you about something?" Hearing this, Joseph put down the ledger in his hand, asked Xiaoji to write next to him, and then said, "My dear Andresi, what do you want to say to me?" He liked this son very much, although I seldom been at home for 2 years, but the relationship between father and son is still very good. "That's right, Dad. I'm going to school next year." "That's all, no problem. Which school do you want to go to?" "For now, I can send you to any school in France as long as you like." "Really? That would be wonderful. I want to go to Brienne." Silent, Joseph did not expect that his son was going to that school. Taking a deep breath, he said, "Can you tell me why you chose to go to that school? Don't tell me that you adore your uncle and want to be a great general like him. What kind of ghost are you? Don't I already know?" Xiaoji knew that he couldn't be fooled, so he said, "Father, everyone knows that Aunt Josephine is not pregnant. Don't ask me how I know, this is already common in the whole family and even in the upper class of France." "Got it, so who do you think will be the next heir of the family?" "Of course it's me. I'm the eldest son of the Bonaparte family," Joseph said with certainty. "Really? But have you ever thought about it? As the power of the family grows, I am afraid that all uncles and aunts will fight for the right of inheritance. Especially Uncle Louis and Uncle Lucien, do you think they will willingly give up the fight for the right of inheritance? Besides, everyone knows that Aunt Josephine has some problems in her personal life. If Uncle Napoleon divorces her and remarries, are you sure that you will get the inheritance?" After listening to Xiaoji's words, Joseph knew that what he said was the truth, and his other 2 younger brothers were indeed not easygoing. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com then asked, "Then what do you think we should do?" He knew that his son was very smart, and other children at this age only knew how to play, but he could already think of these problems. "That's why I went to the Brienne Military Academy. As we all know, my uncle's favorite person in the family is me, and he also graduated from that school. If I study there, he will definitely like him even more. This is a very big bargaining chip for us to fight for the right of inheritance in the future. The matter of Aunt Josephine is even simpler. As long as we give her some warnings, I believe she will restrain herself in order to enjoy the glory and wealth. Then it is very likely that Uncle Napoleon will not divorce her. Then, when the time comes, you will be the eldest son of the family, and I will be the eldest grandson of the family, so who can compete with us for the inheritance right?" Joseph thought for a while, and felt that this method was feasible, so he said, "Well, I agree with you to go to the Brienne Military Academy, but you have to be mentally prepared. Life in the military academy is very hard." And Xiaoji patted his chest to ensure that he would do it. Sure enough, Xiaoji's decision was greatly appreciated by Napoleon, who was on the front line in Egypt, and he even declared publicly that Andresi was his ideal successor. Only Xiaoji's mother and grandmother objected, but under the insistence of Xiaoji and Joseph, they finally had to compromise. So in May 1799, after completing the relevant procedures, Xiaoji, accompanied by Joseph, went to Brienne Military Academy to report. He will study there for 6 years, but his plan is to finish all the courses within 4 years and pass the assessment to go to the Royal Military Academy in Paris in advance. UU Reading welcomes all book lovers to come and read. The latest, fastest, and hottest serial works are all in UU Reading.